in a slowly turning, glittering column of chaff and fish scales and wisps of floating wool. It fell on the trodden clay floor and the edge of the low table and the pot in Ivar's lap and on Ivar's sleeping face, illuminating it and separating it from the surrounding gloom, the way some paintings do, a lined and weather-worn face, heavy, with a kind of hewn quality, not an old face, but not a young one either. His hair was the colour of dirty straw, his beard darker, browner, full and perhaps unclean with a patch of grey over his jaw on the left-hand side that stood out from the rest like a child's handprint. Having no mirror, he had no clear picture in his mind of his own appearance beyond the uncertain reflections he sometimes saw in the island's pools and puddles, though obviously he was conscious of himself in relation to his surroundings, that he was tall enough to have to stoop when he moved about inside the small, low-roofed house, that he was wide enough to fill the doorway when he ducked through it, that he was strong enough, in spite of his illness last winter, to accomplish all the tasks he needed to accomplish. When it was fully dawn, he stepped outside. The brook below the house had widened in the rain, and everywhere the ground was sloppy. At the spring, the mud lapped his feet. He gave the old cow a drink of water and checked the knot on the tether, and then he went to find Peggy in the outfield and stayed talking to her for a while, patting her coarse and straggly mane with the flat of his hand. He called her an old cabbage and a silly, odd-looking person, and a host of other pet names he had for her in his language. In the early light, her coat looked dusty and dull, a dirty grey with a bluish-yellow tinge. "Russ," he said eventually, which was the word he used to tell her they had work to do and it was time they got going. 3. In the Bailey house, having unlocked the door and let himself in, John Ferguson emptied his satchel onto the narrow bed, his spare shirt and his second set of underwear, his comb and his soap, the blue ledger and his papers, his writing accoutrements, and Mary's picture in its tooled leather frame, the pistol, the powder, the ammunition. It was not so snug as Strachan had led him to believe. If it had been comfortable once, it wasn't any more. The narrow iron bed had no blanket, and the only other furniture was a low three-legged table and a single stool. He wondered if he might do better in the church, but when he walked down under a clearing sky to investigate, he found the little grey building was full of hay, and a good part of the roof had fallen in. Well, at least there was a cooking pot in the hearth, and on a ledge behind the house he found a small supply of peat. He also had his box with Mary's fruitcake and his other foodstuffs inside. All of these things were blessings, and for each one he mouthed a silent prayer of thanks. He also reminded himself that he had survived a long and horrible journey, and was, praise be, no longer seasick. He gave thanks for that too, and as he sank down on the little stool, he reminded himself also that he was being paid. So, he would make a fire in the hearth, and dry out his clothes and cook himself something to eat, and try and get a good night's sleep. And in the morning, he would have a little look around the island, spend the day getting his bearings, and after that, he would go and find the man. 4. Ivar led Peggy down past the spring and around the base of the peaked hill. The empty baskets on her back creaked as they walked. Steadily, they plodded in the direction of the shore until they came within sight of a low-lying spit of ground below the white hill which was covered by the sea at flood tide, but lay dry at the ebb. It was dry now, a longish bank that formed a neck of land between the two low stretches of water on either side, and it was towards this slender piece of dry, rocky ground that Ivar, after leaving Peggy to graze, was walking, carrying the wooden box in which he collected and kept his bait. There was hardly any wind, only a faint breeze towards the shore, gentle and steady against his body and his face, and for a moment he stood, enjoying the sensation of the wind ruffling his hair. He'd been out very little this past spring, first because of his illness, and then because of the bad weather when it had been too rough for much outdoor work, and impossible to fish off the rocks. The sea, restless and unruly and wild, spindrift from the heavy breakers striking against the shore and forming a deep mist along the coast. He'd spent most of his time